Mexico isn't exactly a stranger to cartels. For over 50 years, those shadowy organizations have ruled the Mexican underworld, often extending their influence into politics, economics, and everyday life. The cartels have always ruled with an iron fist, using a combination of intimidation, violence, and bribery to maintain their power and control. But the kind of violence earlier Mexican cartels turned to was typically focused on just that, maintaining control over drug trafficking routes and territories. These acts, while brutal, were often more strategic, aimed at asserting dominance rather than spreading terror indiscriminately. This all changed with the rise of the Los Zetas. This cartel practically reinvented the notion of brutality, employing tactics that shocked even the most hardened observers. Los Zetas performed paramilitary-style executions. They tortured their victims in the most horrific ways and posted videos of the torture online, beheaded them and mounted their heads on spikes in urban areas, hung their bodies from bridges, created one mass grave after another filled with immigrants, students, and many other innocent victims. Their ruthlessness and willingness to commit such atrocities quickly set them apart from other cartels, earning them a reputation as the most deadly and feared criminal organization in Mexico and beyond. But Los Zetas' brutality wasn't the only thing that set them apart. Unlike traditional cartels formed by drug traffickers, Los Zetas were formed by elite Mexican Special Forces soldiers, deserters from the Mexican army. Trained in military tactics and warfare, they brought a level of organization previously unseen in the world of Mexican cartels. This made them nothing short of a nightmare for the Mexican police and military, who were often outmatched and even outgunned by Los Zetas' highly trained operatives. Eventually, however, they did manage to beat them, as Los Zetas fell from power almost as quickly as they rose. So how did they manage to do it? What did the war with Mexico's most fearsome and notorious cartel look like? Stick around and find out. But to fully understand the downfall of Los Zetas, you must first learn about their rise to power and the military-style modus operandi that made them stand out so much. After all, we're talking about an organization that even the US government described as the most technologically advanced, sophisticated, and dangerous cartel in Mexico. So how did Los Zetas come to be? Los Zetas actually started as an elite unit of bodyguards. They were formed by Arturo Guzman de Sena, a member of the Air Mobile Special Forces Group, or GAFE for short, an elite division of the Mexican military. Sometime after joining the GAFE, Guzman was recruited by the Gulf Cartel, a major drug trafficking organization at the time. In the beginning, he only took bribes from the cartel's head, Osiel Cardenas Guillen, to help him turn a blind eye to all the drug shipments. However, in 1997, Guzman defected from the GAFE to work for the cartel full-time as Guillen's bodyguard. He quickly earned Guillen's trust, executing his daughter's godfather and Guillen's longtime business partner without a moment's notice when ordered. But the situation in the Gulf Cartel wasn't particularly great at the time. Guillen's fear that he might lose control made him increasingly paranoid. It also led to the conclusion that one elite bodyguard wasn't enough. He needed a whole unit, his own private army, if you will. And what better way to find these elite bodyguards than to go straight to the source, the Mexican army? As a former soldier, Guzman was in charge of recruiting these bodyguards. Through careful negotiation, he managed to convince at least 31 men to desert the army, most of whom came from his previous unit, the GAFE. And so, an elite paramilitary private army was formed to protect Guillen and do his bidding. The army was named Los Zetas, which literally translates to the Z's. The name refers to Guzman, as his federal judicial police radio code as a high-ranking officer was Z1. Each subsequent member of importance received a Z designation, followed by the number that indicated their rank within the organization. Los Zetas weren't some pistol-toting gang members with shaved heads and tattoos. No, they were highly trained soldiers who could kill in cold blood. Interestingly, the training in question actually came from the US for some of Los Zetas. How is this possible? Well, you see, the GAFE soldiers were sent to the U.S. to be trained by the 7th Special Forces Group, an elite operational unit of the U.S. Army Special Forces stationed at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. Fort Liberty, or Fort Bragg as the military installation was known at the time, was precisely where GAFE soldiers received their training in the early 1990s. But what kind of training are we talking about? The 7th Special Forces Group is designed to deploy and execute 9 doctrinal missions. Number 1, unconventional warfare. Number 2, foreign internal defense. Number 3, direct action. Number 4, counterinsurgency. Number 5, special reconnaissance. Number 6, counterterrorism. Number 7, information operations. Number 8, counterproliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And number 9, security force assistance. Future Los Zetas received the standard Special Forces training, learning to read maps and handle light to heavy weapons, machine guns, and automatic weapons. However, their training was primarily focused on counter-insurgency and counter-narcotics operations. Nothing if not ironic, given how Los Zetas went on to use those skills obtained at Fort Liberty. Now, the U.S. Special Forces training Los Zetas to be was nothing new or special. Military forces from around the world were sent to Fort Liberty to train from the best. After all, Special Forces soldiers are known for their ability to slip into enemy territory, live off the land, and execute enemies once the right conditions are met. That's why it shouldn't be surprising that many experts believe that the specific skills learned from the 7th Special Forces Group primed Los Zetas for their careers as contract killers. And they weren't even taught the most advanced commando techniques at Fort Liberty. Given how ruthless and efficient they became with just the standard training, there's no telling the level of devastation they could have inflicted with advanced training. Though not all Los Zetas had the chance to learn from the U.S. Special Forces directly, they were given the necessary training by those who did. Los Zetas set up training camps where they passed on their knowledge to the new recruits, as well as some former federal, state, and local police officers. Later on, as the number of U.S.-trained soldiers in their ranks shrunk, they hired some 30 caibiles to train new recruits. The caibiles are a special operations unit under the Armed Forces of Guatemala, specializing in jungle warfare tactics and counter-insurgency operations. The training camps where these recruits were turned into cold-blooded killing machines were set up similarly to the GAFE training facilities. It was precisely their training that ensured that Los Zetas had an impressively high operational success rate. Since Los Zetas trained like soldiers, they fought like soldiers too. This meant fighting in military-like units which operated semi-autonomously. Each unit has a regional commander, while the overall leadership structure was highly decentralized. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about these units was how they seized areas of interest. Los Zetas would practically invade an area just like an army would. They would move in and hold the territory using brutality to establish and maintain control. This approach allowed them to diversify their activities, getting into local drug dealing, racketeering, stealing cars, and selling pirated goods. Essentially, Los Zetas managed to control every inch of the seized territory and every business taking place in it, and that's how organized and efficient they were. Besides this impressive organization, Los Zetas picked up another thing from the military: the strict code of unwavering loyalty and rigid discipline. Dissent was dealt with rather brutally, which is pretty ironic given how Los Zetas were formed in the first place. The cartel even introduced military-style medals to recognize those among them who followed these principles. The Los Zetas Commando Medallion was made out of gold and silver, featured a prominent Z on the front, and was awarded to Los Zetas troops who did the cartel proud. Of course, doing Los Zetas proud involved nothing short of unspeakable brutality. However, extreme ruthlessness wasn't all the Los Zetas were known for. They were also known for their massive firepower. So massive that the largest weapon seizure in Mexico's history was made possible precisely by Los Zetas' arsenal, and of course, Operation Blackjack. Under this operation, the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, worked together to identify 3 safe houses in Mexico owned by Los Zetas. Then, the Mexican Federal Security Forces raided these houses, finding over 40 kidnapped individuals and a barrage of weapons and military equipment. The seized assets included 540 rifles, including 288 assault rifles and several .50 caliber rifles, 287 hand grenades, 2 M72 Law anti-tank weapons, a rocket launcher, 500,000 rounds of ammunition, 1,000 magazines, 67 ballistic vests, 3 anti-aircraft weapons, 14 sticks of dynamite. That's more weapons than an average U.S. police department has in its arsenal. Los Zetas' training, discipline, organization, and firepower combined allowed them to up the ante of violence among the cartels. These operatives were guided by a simple premise: frighten your enemy enough and you might defeat them without a fight. This type of psychological warfare allowed Los Zetas to compete with the already established cartels of the time. Unlike those cartels, Los Zetas didn't focus on buying alliances. Instead, they terrorized them. Though, to be fair, they still had to grease a palm here and there. For instance, a former Zeta boss, Karim Munoz Castillo, known by his alias Commandant Kalim, revealed that he was paying over $20,000 to corrupt police officers in northern Veracruz. Similarly, another former Zeta, Hector Moreno Villanueva, revealed that the cartel infiltrated the Mexican military so much that they would always get a heads up when soldiers were coming to their area to search their premises or make arrests. That's what made combating Los Zetas particularly challenging for the Mexican state, as you'll hear later on in the video. Another challenge in putting an end to this horrific organization was the sheer level of brutality they were capable of. To make matters worse, other Mexican cartels were forced to ramp up the violence if they wanted to have any chance to preserve their territories or their operations. After all, they were dealing with a cartel known to cook people alive. That's why Los Zetas are credited with increasing the brutality and violence involved in the modern Mexican drug wars, forever altering the cartel landscape in Mexico. To understand just how brutal Los Zetas were, let's do a quick recap of some of the most atrocious crimes they've committed, many of which were way worse than any horror movie you could imagine. This overview will also give you a glimpse into what the war against Los Zetas looked like in Mexico. All the most horrifying attacks carried out by Los Zetas took place after they split from the Gulf Cartel and began an independent operation. The first among them is the San Fernando Massacre, which was discovered on August 24, 2010. A few days before the discovery, a group of 72 immigrants, mainly from Central and South America, was traveling through Tamaulipas, where Los Zetas was based. The group was headed for the U.S. border when it was surrounded and cut off by Los Zetas. The cartel initially asked for ransom, but since the group didn't have enough money, they were asked to work as hitmen for Los Zetas and received $1,000 every 15 days. All of the immigrants, 58 men and 14 women, refused the offer. So they were taken to a nearby warehouse, put on their knees against the wall, and shot in the back of their heads, one by one. One Ecuadorian immigrant managed to survive after the bullet struck him in the neck, not the head. Still, he played dead until Los Zetas operatives left the area. Then he traveled almost 14 miles before he happened to cross a military checkpoint. There, he told the Mexican Marines what had happened. At first, he wasn't believed. How is this possible? Well, the cartels were no strangers to using similar ploys to ambush and execute police and military officers. Eventually, the Mexican authorities realized the man's story was true and launched a search operation. They descended on the Tamaulipas ranch via air and ground and were met with a rain of bullets fired by Los Zetas present at the ranch. These Los Zetas were so heavily armed and guarded that the officers had no choice but to retreat after a whole day of shootings. The next day, the Mexican military armed itself with additional troops and weapons and stormed the ranch. This time, no one was there to meet them. Well, no one except the 70 or so handcuffed and blindfolded bodies of poor immigrants who were slaughtered by Los Zetas. Besides the bodies, the military recovered 21 rifles, 101 ammunition clips, 4 bulletproof vests, and 4 vehicles. One of these vehicles was even a replica of the trucks used by the Mexican naval infantry. The next large-scale massacre was discovered not even a year later at the same place, earning it the name of the Second Massacre of San Fernando. This time, the Mexican authorities weren't tipped off by a survivor. Instead, they noticed that numerous suitcases belonging to bus passengers in Tamaulipas weren't being claimed. The authorities launched an immediate investigation, which led them to the La Jolla Ranch in the San Fernando municipality. What they found at the ranch was even more horrific than the previous massacre. At first, they exhumed 59 corpses from 8 unmarked mass graves. Within the following 2 months, these figures rose to 193 bodies and 47 total mass graves. The bodies belonged to the passengers who were kidnapped after their buses were hijacked along the Mexican Federal Highway 101. But before they were killed, they were tortured in the most horrific ways. The women were raped. The men were forced to fight to the death with the other hostages using knives, machetes, clubs, and hammers. And those who managed to survive and kill the other hostages were recruited for Los Zetas. The sheer horror of the second massacre of San Fernando prompted the Mexican government to take drastic measures. The military immediately deployed 650 soldiers to San Fernando, establishing a military base in the region. The troops stationed in San Fernando took over local police duties, focusing on restoring peace to the beleaguered municipality. The peace in question involved arresting over 80 Los Zetas in less than 3 months. The only attack that claimed more lives than the second massacre of San Fernando took place that same year, a month before the first San Fernando victims were discovered. This attack is also notable, as it demonstrates just how far-reaching Los Zetas' influence was, even among the Mexican federal police officers vetted by the DEA. What happened is that the DEA managed to persuade a high-ranking Zeta operative to reveal the trackable cell phone identification numbers of two of the cartel's most wanted leaders. Once it obtained the information, the DEA shared it with the Mexican federal authorities. Unsurprisingly, this information quickly got around to Miguel Angel Trevino and his brother Omar, the very people whose cell phone ID numbers were compromised. Again, unsurprisingly, the brothers didn't take this information very well. They set out to exact revenge on the people who betrayed them and anyone even remotely connected to them. For the diabolical brothers, this meant killing between 300 and 500 people in the quaint ranching town of Allende, some 1.5 miles away from Eagle Pass, Texas. No mercy was shown on that fateful day in March 2011, with men, women, and children killed, homes demolished, and entire blocks left in ruin. The Allende massacre clearly showed that Los Zetas had the Mexican authorities in the palm of their hands. To understand just how much Los Zetas weren't fazed about the Mexican police, all you need to know is that they weren't afraid to conduct attacks in broad daylight. This brings us to the next atrocity in Los Zetas' long list of horrors, the 2011 Monterrey casino attack. After the casino owners refused to pay protection money to the cartel, 12 Zeta troops stormed the establishment in the middle of the day and set it on fire, killing 52 civilians. The Mexican forces arrived only a few minutes after the fire was started, but it took them several hours before they demolished the walls of the casino and retrieved the bodies. As a response to this horrific attack, 3,000 soldiers were sent to Monterrey, while the rest of Nuevo León was patrolled by armored units and U.S.-made Black Hawk helicopters. At the time, the attack was classified as the bloodiest in the history of the city of Monterrey and one of the most violent in the state of Nuevo León. Unfortunately, after only a year, another bone-chilling attack in the same state would almost eclipse this brutality: the Cadreta Jimenez massacre. During this massacre, 49 people were decapitated and mutilated by Los Zetas, who then dumped their bodies along the Mexican Federal Highway 40. The victims were reportedly members of the rival Sinaloa Cartel, an organization originally headed by the infamous Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. After the discovery, the highway was blocked by federal agents and state police officers for over 7 hours, with an additional 50 police officers deployed to secure the municipality of Cadreta. But was that all the Mexican authorities did in this brutal war against Los Zetas? Only react after a massacre was committed? Absolutely not. The Mexican authorities actively employed the so-called decapitation strategy pioneered by former Mexican President Felipe Calderón, who is also credited with starting the Mexican drug war. The decapitation strategy focused on targeting and locating the top leaders of the cartels and either capturing or killing them. The goal was to destabilize or dismantle the group altogether. Unfortunately for Mexican forces, Los Zetas proved to be rather adept at absorbing losses and continuing their operations as if nothing happened. This primarily had to do with their military training and decentralized leadership approach. Even worse, this was only one of the challenges to the militarized crackdown of Los Zetas, a cartel that's remembered as incredibly difficult to disrupt. Other challenges included the group's training itself. Remember, these individuals were trained on how to defeat insurgencies, and trained by U.S. elite soldiers no less. This allowed them to successfully evade many of the tactics used by the Mexican forces. Next, Los Zetas had people in virtually every police and military unit, as the Allende massacre demonstrated. Thanks to this, they escaped capture on many occasions, as well as disrupted law enforcement operations from within. And finally, the sheer ruthlessness and willingness to use extreme violence made Los Zetas a nearly insurmountable foe. Most Mexican police officers were simply ill-equipped to face such a merciless adversary. This mismatch in capability often resulted in catastrophic outcomes for law enforcement, further complicating efforts to dismantle the cartel. And yet, these efforts persisted until they finally paid off, until Los Zetas were no more, at least in their original paramilitary formation. To achieve this outcome, the Mexican authorities had to take out one Zetas leader after another. Today, almost all of the original 21 Zetas have been either captured or killed. With this in mind, here's an overview of how the police and military operations accomplished the task. The original Zeta, Arturo Guzman de Sena, or Z1, was also the first to be killed by the military. He was shot to death with over 50 bullets in 2002, after Mexican soldiers were tipped off that he was in a restaurant in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Rogelio González Pizania, Z2, took over Los Zetas after Guzman's death, but he was captured some 2 years later by the members of the former federal preventive police officers as well as federal agents. Next in line, Heriberto Lascano, or Z3, managed to evade authorities much longer. This shouldn't be surprising given he was known as the executioner within the organization, a nickname he earned through sheer brutality and cold calculation. He was eventually taken out by the Mexican Navy on October 7, 2012. At that point, the control over Los Zetas passed to Miguel Ángel Trevino. If you remember, Trevino was one of the two brothers involved in the Allende massacre. Interestingly, Trevino wasn't among the initial members of Los Zetas, hence his Z40 code name. However, he managed to quickly rise up through the ranks with sheer brutality and ruthlessness. Reportedly, he was the one who oversaw both the first and second San Fernando massacres. But it's important to note that Trevino was also the first Zeta commander who didn't come from a military background. He was nothing more than a drug trafficker with an incredibly violent nature. Unsurprisingly, this marked a massive shift in the Los Zetas' operations. The violence was still as intense as ever, but the group's organization and military discipline slowly started to erode. And when the discipline broke down, the infighting began. Naturally, Mexican authorities used this to their advantage. In July 2013, the Mexican Marine Corps managed to capture Trevino, once again decapitating Los Zetas. He was intercepted near Nuevo León while riding with two Zeta lieutenants in a pickup truck. This capture was carried out without a single bullet fired. After being detained by the Marine Corps via helicopter, the Zetas in the pickup truck were arrested by ground troops who arrived as support. This swift operation was the result of a several-month-long surveillance operation. When capturing Trevino, the authorities also retrieved 8 guns and $2 million in cash. Trevino was reportedly replaced by his brother Omar, or Z42, but he too was captured relatively quickly in March 2015. After the capture of both Trevino brothers, the Los Zetas lost most of their power and territory, getting replaced by Jalisco Cartel New Generation, the new violent cartel in Mexico. During the last few months of Los Zetas' supremacy, the Mexican authorities were scoring one victory after another. In October 2013, they captured a reported top Zeta operative, Gerardo Jaramillo, whose arrest led to the discovery of a massive weapons cache. Mexican authorities seized assault rifles, grenade launchers, magazines, and around 4,000 rounds of ammunition of various calibers. In May 2014, the Mexican security forces took out Galindo Mellado Cruz, aka Z11, after raiding his hideout in the city of Reynosa. In March 2015, a potential successor of Z42, Ramiro Perez Moreno, was detained by Mexican Marines in the state of Tamaulipas. He was traveling in an SUV which also contained 4 more Zetas, as well as 4 assault rifles, a fragmentation grenade, and cartridges. The Mexican authorities continued persecuting Los Zetas even after their quote downfall, ensuring the organization can never reach the level of influence and terror it once had. It was precisely this ongoing commitment in the wider context of the Mexican drug war that put an end to one of the most brutal and resilient cartels in modern history. However, this has in no way ended the cartel violence in Mexico. In fact, this violence only seems to be intensifying. By 2023, it had already been 6 years since Mexico hit the 30,000 murders mark, thus making it one of the most violent periods in the country's recent history. Now let us pass the question over to you. Is there a way to truly stop the Mexican cartels? And what do you think of Los Zetas, the cartel that single-handedly contributed to the rise of violence committed by these organizations? Which of their actions shocked you the most? And how well do you think the Mexican police and military handled them? Share your opinions in the comments section below. Now go check out Mexican Cartel Island gets raided by Texas Rangers, or click this other video instead.